Susan Anthony was clearly one of the great American heroes. One of the things that's interesting is that people associate her only with the women's rights struggle, but she actually spent probably most of her life as an abolitionist fighting against slavery, which she was involved in from the 1830s all the way up to the Civil War. She also did some very radical and surprising things. One of the ones that is kind of a form of civil disobedience is she actually went to the polls and tried to vote in 1872. She was very, very active in organizing the women's rights movement, which of course ended up with the vote for suffrage, but included fighting for divorce rights, for property rights, for access to education, for access to the professions. Throughout her long career, they actually chalked up one victory after another on many of these other issues, which tend to be neglected. Consider women's property rights. The law in just about every state in the country was that when a woman married, everything she owned, except for her personal property, meaning jewelry and clothing, everything else belonged to her husband. Another example is the issue of child custody. In the law, children belonged to their father, almost as property. And that meant, for example, that if a couple separated, if a woman wanted to leave an abusive man, she would lose her children. And actually, this was one of the most important changes in helping women fight against what we today call domestic violence, because the fact is that almost all women who were mothers would not give up their children. And so it required them, it ended up making them stay in abusive relationships. One fun fact, I think, is that she and Elizabeth Cady Stanton formed a friendship that was absolutely a friendship of opposites. Stanton was a mother of 6 children. Susan Anthony never married, never had any children. Susan Anthony was the kind of person who could organize and create an agenda and get a movement going. Stanton did not have those kind of practical skills. Instead, Stanton was very eloquent as a writer. And so they formed this kind of yin and yang partnership in which they each used each other's strengths to maximize their impact. One thing that would be very familiar to her is what today we call slut shaming. Because these women, Anthony, Stanton, and many, many hundreds of others who spoke out publicly, took unbelievable abuse. They were called immoral. They were called ugly women who went into women's rights because they couldn't, quote, get a man. So that part of it would be very familiar to her and would probably reinforce her understanding of how radical it is, what a radical change it was for women to become full citizens.